Roger Federer made $130 million hitting a tennis ball, and that is the least impressive number in this entire video. The man with 20 Grand Slam titles and 310 weeks at world number 1 didn't retire a wealthy athlete. He retired the first billionaire the sport of tennis has ever produced, and almost none of that billion came from winning matches. So how does someone earn $130 million playing the game and then earn close to $1 billion more away from it? So how do you turn a tennis career into $1 billion when the tennis itself only paid a tenth of that? Federer figured out the answer earlier than almost any athlete before him. He didn't want to get rich selling his tennis. He wanted to get rich selling his name, because a name doesn't tear a knee or slide down the rankings. It keeps earning quietly, long after the last serve. For most players, prize money is the whole career, and it only lasts as long as the body does. Federer treated it almost as a side income. The real business was building his name into something the biggest companies on earth would pay a fortune to stand next to, and he spent the better part of 20 years doing exactly that, wearing a single logo. That logo was the Nike swoosh. Federer signed with Nike as a teenager, back in the 1990s, after a scout watched a wildly talented, hot-tempered kid melt down at an under-14 tournament in Miami and decided the temper was worth the risk. The first deal was 5 years and about $500,000. He broke through fast. His fourth-round upset of Pete Sampras at Wimbledon in 2001 was the moment the sport realized he wasn't just a future champion, he was a marketable one. By 2004, he was the #1 player in the world, and by 2008, Nike was paying him a reported $10 million a year. The company also built him his own personal logo, that clean interlocking R and F, and turned it into its own merchandising line, the hats and caps you'd spot in every crowd. Fans loved the RF. They bought the shirts, the towels, all of it, and it quietly became one of the most recognizable personal brands in all of sport. But there was one detail almost nobody was paying attention to, and it looked tiny at the time. It wasn't. Federer didn't own the RF. Nike did. In 2018, after 2 decades together, Federer and Nike split, and when his team went out to find a new deal, the number that came back stopped the sports world cold. A Japanese clothing company called Uniqlo signed him for $300 million over 10 years. Think about that for a second. That is $30 million a year, 3 times what Nike had been paying him, from a brand most tennis fans had barely heard of. At the time, it was reported as one of the richest endorsement deals any athlete had ever signed, in any sport. But the size of the check isn't even the clever part. Uniqlo doesn't make tennis shoes and it doesn't make rackets, so Federer simply kept wearing his old Nike shoes, unpaid, for another 3 years, kept swinging his Wilson racket, and still collected the biggest apparel deal in the history of the game. And then there was one line buried in the contract, the line that turned a huge deal into a legendary one. It had no retirement clause. Federer would collect his $30 million a year whether he was playing or not, straight through retirement. He had quietly turned himself from an athlete into a brand, and the tennis had become optional. Here is the part most people missed. This wasn't Uniqlo overpaying for a fading star. Nike's tennis clothing had never sold anything close to its basketball or football gear, the LeBron and Ronaldo money, so paying Federer $10 million a year arguably cost Nike more than he ever brought back on merchandise. Uniqlo had run the numbers the other way. They were trying to push into Europe and North America, and a global star who kept selling their clothes right through his retirement was worth every dollar to them. Then Federer made the move that separates him from every other rich athlete in history. Around 2019, a small Swiss running shoe company called On came knocking, wanting him as the face of the brand. Nearly every athlete in that spot asks the same first question: how big is the check? Federer asked whether he could own part of the company instead. Rather than take a paycheck, he put in around 50 million Swiss francs for a stake of roughly 3%. And this wasn't a vanity badge. Federer had genuinely been wearing On shoes for his own training. His wife and friends wore them too, and the founders, fellow Swiss, reached out after noticing. Dinners turned into a friendship, and the friendship turned into an ownership stake. He got a real say in product and marketing, and in 2021, On even launched a sneaker line named after him, called the Roger, so now his name sat on a product he partly owned. 2 years after he invested, in September 2021, On went public on the New York Stock Exchange, valued at around $11 billion. Federer's 3% was suddenly worth roughly $330 million, from a single deal where he took equity instead of a fee. He made more money owning a slice of a shoe company than he earned in 24 years of professional tennis. That is not a typo. Endorsements pay you once. Ownership pays you for the rest of your life. By now, the brands lining up for Federer weren't sportswear labels at all. They were luxury houses: Rolex, Mercedes-Benz, Moet and Chandon, Lindt, Rimowa, Barilla, Credit Suisse. Look at who is on that list. These are some of the highest margin companies on the planet, and they were paying a premium for one thing Federer had spent 2 decades building: class. He never smashed a racket for the cameras, never picked a public fight, never embarrassed a sponsor, so he could rent his reputation to companies that sell $40,000 watches and expect their buyers to trust the association. Many of those deals were built to outlast his career on purpose. Rolex and Mercedes were betting on Federer, the icon, the kind of ambassador who keeps moving watches and cars for decades after a player's final match. At his peak, he was pulling in somewhere around $90 million a year, almost all of it from endorsements rather than prize money. And in 2020, Forbes named Federer the single highest-paid athlete on the planet, about $106 million for the year, ahead of every footballer and basketball player on Earth, and the first tennis player ever to top that list. What makes it almost funny is that he did it in a year when, between a knee injury and the pandemic, he barely played at all. And here is the clearest proof of what that name was worth. In 2019, Federer played an exhibition against Rafael Nadal in Cape Town, an event he called the Match in Africa. It pulled in 51,954 fans, the largest crowd ever to watch a tennis match anywhere on Earth, and raised millions for his foundation in one night. There were no ranking points and no Grand Slam on the line, just Federer's name filling a stadium bigger than most major finals. Tournaments around the world were reportedly happy to pay him 7-figure appearance fees simply to show up, because his name alone sold the tickets, the hospitality, and the television coverage. If you're getting something out of this, take a second to subscribe. This channel breaks down the money behind the biggest names in tennis, every single week. So Federer was the highest-paid athlete on Earth in a year he hardly played. But what he did next made even the endorsement money look small. Remember that RF logo Federer didn't own? That loose end almost turned into a real problem. When he left Nike, Nike kept the trademark, which meant the company could, in theory, keep selling RF hats and shirts forever, using Roger Federer's own initials without paying him a cent. For nearly 2 years he walked onto court with a blank cap, because the brand built on his name was locked in a filing cabinet in Oregon. He was blunt about it in interviews. The initials were his, and one way or another they were coming back. And Nike was actually caught in a trap. One intellectual property lawyer, John Shaw, spelled it out. Keep selling RF gear and risk a lawsuit for implying Federer still endorsed it. Or pull the line and risk losing the trademark entirely, because a logo left unused for 5 years can be cancelled. So in early 2020, Federer negotiated the RF logo back from Nike, and within a year, Uniqlo was selling RF hats again. He finally owned his own name, outright. And that idea, own the thing instead of renting it, is the one Federer took all the way to the top, because he didn't stop at his logo. Back in 2013, he had started a management company called Team 8 with his agent Tony Godsick, and Team 8 went and built its own tournament, the Laver Cup, which launched in 2017. This wasn't a glorified exhibition. It became an official event on the ATP calendar, a Ryder Cup-style team competition of Europe against the rest of the world, and Federer's company held a stake in the whole property. He had effectively invented a tournament and then collected from it. He had gone from employee to brand to part owner of the sport that made him. So add it all up, about $130 million in prize money, $300 million from Uniqlo, another $330 million and rising from On, around $90 million a year, for years, from the luxury brands, a management company, a tournament of his own. By 2020, Forbes calculated that Federer had earned more than $1 billion across his career, the first tennis player ever to reach that mark, and the overwhelming majority of it was made away from the court. Nadal and Novak Djokovic both won more Grand Slam titles than he did. On the court, they beat him. But Federer won the money. He walked away with 20 Grand Slam titles, 310 weeks at number one, and a fortune that will keep paying him long after every one of those records is broken. If that surprised you, wait until you see how Wilson, the company that made his rackets, quietly took over the whole sport. That one is next.